What kind of a monster is Martin Whitley? The 15th episode of Prodigal's Son gave us a hint into the mind of this killer. So, the most interesting thing this episode has been Martin and his nightmares/hallucinations. So, before we get into that, let's just quickly go through everything else that happened in the episode. The team finds a body that is perfectly embalmed. Malcolm is, as always, excited for something unusual. And the interaction where JT and Gil are like, don't say it, and Malcolm very adorably replies, necrophiliac, and he's like, understandable. Gil and JT super worried. Peak comedy. Now, some crime solving later, they catch the killer who wanted to preserve her relationship with the victim. Malcolm gives the speech about letting go, realizing he needs to do the same with Martin. Well, at least Malcolm wasn't in any heart-stopping mortal danger this time. Let's be clear here, a gun pointed at him isn't exactly new. Anyway, Jessica and Ainsley's moments were really sweet. I still hate that the fandom is hating so much on Eve. From what we've seen, she is not a bad guy. I just find that this fandom treats the women on this show very poorly. First with Jessica, then Ainsley, and now Eve. Now getting to the point, Martin Whitley and his hallucinations. In the beginning of the episode, Malcolm says that coma patients don't really dream but hallucinate in such a way that it can actually feel like a nightmare. It is interesting because the one thing that is consistent about Martin is that he loves Malcolm, and the only time where he shows fear in these nightmares is when Malcolm is threatened. The dream starts with Martin picking up his next victim, the infamous girl in the box. He offers to help her with her sprained ankle. Now, the question is, did he do it because he was looking for his next victim, or was it out of kindness? Or maybe it was out of kindness, but then he thought that it was going to be his next victim. Personally, I think it was the former. I doubt he'd do anything out of the kindness of his heart. He takes her to his home, and when she's trying to make a call, he chloroforms her, just when Jessica comes in. A much different woman than the one we know now. From the looks of it, a carefree, drunk-ish woman. It is something that Martin's attorney comments on earlier in the episode too. So, if she was under some or other influence almost constantly, then that explains why she wouldn't have noticed Martin and his killings. Though she does seem happier than we've ever seen her on the show. Martin charms her and she says something like, "What has gotten into you?" which makes sense since he just chloroformed his next victim and ew. In the next dream sequence, Martin monologues a bit about minutes expanding and time slowing down and him wanting to freeze time, which is interesting. Does he want to freeze time in this moment of power and dominance? Or is it something more, like being in this time of his life with a wife that loves him and kids that adore him and look up to him? In the first episode, we find that the quartet was an experiment by Martin to find out how much pain the human body could endure before giving out. And here it seems to be something about freezing time. All these big concepts remind me so much of Hannibal and the show's poetic and operatic tone, which it got from leaning into Hannibal's old European vision of the world. Now, he would often say things in the most dramatic way possible and take a long tangent to answer a question going in about life and destiny and God and stuff like that. Now, here's what I think. Martin could be thinking of the world in a similar way from a more curious and scientific perspective. After all, slowing down time is a common sci-fi trope. Then, when you think about it, Doesn't everyone want to slow down time and feel every moment of their lives, especially if they're happy? Hell, it's even common for people under stress to want to slow down time and just breathe for a second. So like Malcolm said earlier, understandable. Martin opens the box and inside there is nothing. The girl is no longer in the box. He goes upstairs and the girl is talking on the phone. She comes towards him, slashing at him. She tells him that he was going to pay for what he'd done to her and that she would start with his son. For the first time, we see Martin beg to not hurt Malcolm, showing that even back then he cared deeply for his son. In the next nightmare scene, the girl asks him why he killed his victims, and he says because he wanted to. And he isn't being flippant about it. He confesses that he doesn't know where this need to kill comes from. Was it genetics, or was it mommy didn't love him enough or loved him too much? Then it goes to his dad. We see him pause a second and look at young Malcolm, saying daddy did horrible things to him, which... Observe how when he talks about mommy, he's being rather general, but when he talks about his father, it's specific. It's more specific than the way he talked about his mother. So the obvious conclusion here is that it might be some form of abuse from his father, though he doesn't think that is what made him a serial killer. He admits that it could be anything. If his father was abusive, that explains why he would want to be a good father to his son. What really concerns me about this is that he doesn't want to be a good father to both his children. He barely even mentions Ainsley all throughout the season. No, his sole focus is Malcolm. It could be because he sees himself as a young boy in Malcolm and wants to provide the protection he never got as a child. His lack of control in his childhood as a result of the abuse would explain why he was obsessed with control in his adult life. Martin realizes that because this is his nightmare, that he is in his head, and because he is a predatory psychopath, he is always in control. He flips the tables on the girl and is almost about to kill her, talking about monsters, when he sees the real Malcolm approach him in the real world and says that he's going to go back to his family. The way Martin imagines Malcolm is also noteworthy, as in his nightmare, when Malcolm is talking about him being a predatory psychopath, there is something akin to pride in his eyes. This is how Martin wants to be seen by Malcolm, accepted for who he is, maybe even proud of it. Another thing I noticed is that the girl in the box looks a lot like Jessica, and my first thought was if they are surrogates for her. I'm not sure if that is true, since I think that Martin also had male victims. Tell me what you thought of the new episode, and what is the thing you are most excited about in the next one. Subscribe to this channel for more Prodigal Son content. I will soon be dropping a Jessica and Martin deep dive analysis, so stay tuned. Sending love. Toodles!